In the world of science, some experiments have shocked people with their strange and sometimes scary findings. These experiments dig deep into the human mind, testing its limits and uncovering mysteries. Let's take a look at 10 of the most surprising psychological experiments ever conducted. Psychology, like other sciences, needs experiments to test ideas. But here's the catch. In experiments, researchers have to change things. Changing people can be dangerous and wrong. Today, experiments with people have to be very safe and careful. But in the past, things weren't so good. Some experiments were bad and hurtful. In 1920, a famous psychologist named John Watson wanted to see if a baby could learn to be afraid of something for no good reason. He called it the Little Albert experiment. The baby in the experiment was about 8 months old. Watson and his team introduced the baby to a white rat, and at first, the baby wasn't scared of it. To try and make the baby afraid of the rat, Watson would make loud noises whenever the baby saw the rat. They did this again and again until the baby was scared of the rat, even without the loud noise. Then, Watson tried something interesting. He showed the baby other things similar to the rat, like rabbits, dogs, and even a person dressed as Santa Claus. The baby was scared of all of these things too, even though they hadn't done anything scary. This experiment showed that people can learn to be afraid of things, even if there's no real reason to be scared. It's an important example of how people can learn things, even without realizing it. The monster study is a shocking example of an unethical experiment that caused lasting harm. Conducted by University of Iowa professor Wendell Johnson and his graduate student Mary Tudor, the study aimed to understand speech difficulties. They divided 22 orphaned children into 2 groups. One group received encouragement, while the other was ridiculed for any speech problems, even if they didn't have any. Shockingly, children who were ridiculed saw their speech deteriorate, and some who initially had no speech issues developed them. The study lasted for 6 months and caused lasting psychological damage to the children. Some developed lifelong speech problems, behavioral tics, and chronic psychological issues. In 1951, Solomon Asch conducted a groundbreaking experiment to understand conformity to group pressure. Participants believed they were in a vision test, but in reality, they were asked to identify the longest line on a card. Unknown to them, other participants were actors deliberately giving wrong answers. Shockingly, nearly 1/3 of participants conformed to the incorrect majority opinion, even when they knew it was wrong. This showed a powerful influence of group pressure on individual judgment. After World War II, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand why people obeyed orders that harmed others, like what happened in Nazi Germany. His experiment aimed to see how far people would go if told by an authoritative figure. In the experiment, there were 3 roles: the teacher, the learner, and the experimenter. But here's the twist. Only the teacher was a real participant, while the learner was an actor pretending to be shocked. The teacher was asked to give electric shocks to the learner whenever they made a mistake, increasing the voltage each time. The shocks weren't real, but the teacher didn't know that. Even when the learner cried out in pain or refused to continue, many teachers kept shocking them. Milgram found that around 65% of participants went all the way to the highest voltage, even though it was hurting someone else. This experiment showed how people could obey orders from authoritative figures, even if it went against their conscience. It's a sobering reminder of how easily people can be influenced to do things they might not want to do. In the early 1960s, Professor Albert Bandura of Stanford University conducted the Bobo doll experiment to explore if violent behavior could be learned through observation. He wanted to test the social learning theory, which suggests that people learn new behaviors by watching others. Bandura and his team gathered nursery-aged children and split them into 3 groups. One group watched adults behaving aggressively towards the Bobo doll, while another group saw non-aggressive behavior, and the third group didn't see any model at all. Afterward, the children were left alone with toys, including the Bobo doll. Shockingly, the children who had seen aggressive behavior were more likely to imitate it, even hitting the doll with a mallet. In 1965, psychologist Martin Seligman and Steve Mayer conducted an experiment on learned helplessness, a concept related to how animals and humans respond to negative situations. Seligman noticed something interesting while studying conditioning in dogs. Dogs that had learned to expect an electric shock after hearing a bell sometimes gave up trying to avoid the shock, even when there was a chance to escape it. This behavior was different from dogs that hadn't been conditioned in the same way. They called this behavior learned helplessness. It means that when animals or people feel like they can't change a bad situation, they might stop trying, even when there's a way out. To test this, the psychologists placed dogs in harnesses. Some dogs could stop the shocks by pressing a lever, while others couldn't. Then, they put the dogs in a box where they could easily escape the shocks by jumping out. Surprisingly, the dogs that had experienced uncontrollable shocks didn't try to escape, showing signs of learned helplessness. The monkey drug trials of 1969 were a series of experiments conducted at the University of Michigan, ostensibly to study the effects of illicit drugs on primates. However, the experiments turned into a horrifying display of animal suffering. Monkeys and rats were subjected to self-administration of various drugs, including cocaine, amphetamines, codeine, morphine, and alcohol. The animals experienced severe distress, mutilating themselves by tearing their fingers off, clawing away their fur, and even breaking bones in attempts to escape their cages. Critics argue that these experiments served no purpose other than to repeat studies that had already been validated numerous times. The suffering inflicted on the animals was excessive and unnecessary. In 1971, Professor Philip Zimbardo conducted the Stanford prison experiment to understand how people adapt to roles in society. He recruited 24 male college students and assigned them to be either prisoners or guards in a simulated prison. Quickly, the guards started mistreating the prisoners, and the situation escalated. Zimbardo had to end the experiment after just 6 days due to the dangerous behavior exhibited by both guards and prisoners. The study revealed how easily people can become cruel when given power over others and how individuals adapt to assigned roles, even if those roles are harmful. During apartheid in South Africa, the Aversion Project was a disturbing program aimed at curing homosexuality in military conscripts. Gay soldiers endured brutal treatments including electroshock therapy, chemical castration, and forced sex change operations. Dr. Aubrey Levin led this secretive program until 1989. Most victims were young, aged 16 to 24. Shockingly, Dr. Levin later moved to Canada and continued practicing until imprisoned for patient assault. In England, a similar cruelty occurred in the late 1960s when homosexual men were subjected to electric shocks when shown pictures of men, highlighting the harm caused by attempts to cure homosexuality. Psychologist Harry Harlow conducted controversial experiments at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the 1970s. He aimed to study maternal bonding and its effects on development. Harlow isolated young monkeys from their mothers and kept them in vertical chambers that prevented contact with other monkeys. The monkeys developed no social skills and exhibited severe depression. These experiments were widely criticized for their cruelty and lack of new data. Critics condemned the unethical treatment of animals and the inevitable conclusion of depression. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Stay curious.